Hello, I'm really glad you're here. On this channel, I share simple, quiet stories about life, love, and the little feelings we all go through. If that sounds like something you enjoy, don't forget to subscribe. Every subscriber gives me a little more encouragement to keep telling these stories. Now, let's begin today's story. September in Maine is a strange thing. The sky carries hints of silver and gold, and the sea keeps lapping at the shore like it's whispering a sorrowful tale no one really listens to. Seaborough is perched above the bay, where a few main roads cut through rows of moss-covered wooden houses and tucked away in some forgotten corner of that painting. The little fire station still stands silent as ever. 5 a.m. Mason Whitaker's room is still dark. He sits at the edge of his bed, bare-chested, elbows on knees, eyes unfocused as dawn slices a thin orange line through the curtain. On the nightstand, a broken alarm clock, a dusty family photo, and a half-finished beer from last night. The room hasn't changed in 3 years, except for the thicker layer of dust on the shelves and the fire uniforms hanging neatly like he's still the man he used to be, the one who believed he could save the world. But that day, the day Kyle died, everything froze. Kyle was Mason's younger brother, 6 years apart. They weren't just siblings, they were best friends, inseparable. Kyle always looked at Mason with pride, and Mason always felt stronger when Kyle was near. 3 years ago, Kyle died in a fire, right after his 22nd birthday. It was supposed to be a simple rescue, but the wind shifted, flames spread fast, and Mason, the brother, the captain, the hope was too late. Mason gets up, walks to the bathroom sink, turns on the faucet. He stares into the mirror's sunken brown eyes, sun-touched skin gone pale like ash. He grips the sink, exhales hard.
Still here, yeah, still alive.
He doesn't pray, doesn't curse. Just another morning routine, facing himself before pulling on the heavy uniform and stepping outside, pretending he's fine. As he steps out, the early autumn chill cuts at his sleeves. Mason pulls up the collar of his fire jacket and walks the sloped street toward the sea. The town is still asleep. Only the cries of gulls and the distant waves keep him company. Salt air fills his lungs, and it stings because it reminds him of the morning Kyle left and never came back. The fire station sits beside a small cafe called Daisy's Brew, where Mason used to spend hours with Kyle after night shifts. Now, he always arrives before it opens, avoiding people, avoiding even his reflection in the window. He circles to the back door, unlocks it, steps inside without turning on the light. The room is still, save for the soft whine of an old AC unit. The gear is neatly arranged on the wall, shining like new because Mason cleans it almost daily. He opens his locker, pulls out a notebook, and begins logging equipment numbers, every move precise, mechanical like he's just a machine reliving the same day. Sometimes he wonders, if he disappeared, who would wipe the dust off the oxygen masks? Who would remember the hose on truck 3 leaks? The back door creaks open.
You beat us here again, huh?
Charlie Mason's teammate, in his 40s, is the only one still asking him out for beers, even knowing the answer. He walks in with 2 cups of hot coffee, sets one down next to Mason.
Thanks.
You should have slept in. You look like a damn ghost.
I'm fine.
Charlie says nothing. He sits, sips his coffee, eyes still on Mason.
It's today, isn't it?
Mason clenches the pen in his hand. The question cuts deep, not enough to bleed, but straight to the bone.
I don't remember.
Bullshit. You remember every second.
They sit in silence, the old AC humming in the background. Outside, sunlight begins to sneak through the blinds, casting a soft golden layer on Mason's face. He looks up at the photo on the wall, a team shot from 3 years ago. In the center, Kyle stands with his arm around his big brother, grinning so bright you'd think he was the oldest. But then the world did the unthinkable and Mason couldn't save him.
I dreamed about him last night, same as always. the cabin burning down, the fire swallowing even his screams.
And you didn't make it in time?
No, this time I never went in. I just stood there, watched, did nothing.
Charlie lowers his eyes. It's been 3 years. And the nightmares haven't changed. He's told Mason it wasn't his fault. Everyone has. But words aren't strong enough to cut through guilt that clings like poison ivy to the soul.
You can't keep living like this. Mason, Kyle wouldn't want that.
I'm not living, I'm just not dead.
It's the first time Mason says it out loud. And maybe the scariest part is that saying it makes him feel just a little lighter, like maybe, somehow. Kyle is listening. The clock hits 6 a.m. A new shift begins. The rest of the crew filters in, breaking the heavy air with laughter and talk about last night's baseball game. Mason retreats to the supply room, quiet as always. He likes it there, where the light from the small window comes in dimly. The smell of burnt rubber, smoke, and steel is oddly comforting, a reminder that in the chaos, at least some things are still under control. His phone vibrates, a text from Mum. He doesn't open it, he already knows what it says. Have you visited him yet? And he's not ready to answer. Dawn fully arrives, and Mason steps outside to take a deep breath. The sea glitters under sunlight, like it's mocking him. His heart is heavy, but his feet keep moving. Because even if he no longer believes in tomorrow, duty remains. And sometimes that's the only thing keeping him tethered to this world. Riley Bennett remembered the last time she set foot in Seaborough. It was Kyle's funeral. Rain poured like grief itself, sea wind lashing at her black coat, wet hair clinging to her cheeks as if trying to hold on to something already lost. But sometimes, in her dreams, she saw herself leaving the town the night before on a midnight bus. No goodbyes, no backward glance. Today, after all these years, Riley had returned, no longer the skinny med student with a worn-out backpack, but a full-fledged doctor. She had just finished her 3-year residency in Boston and had been invited to stay. She declined. Her heart still hadn't let go of something buried here, something that surfaced more clearly with every dream, every sunrise. Her car crept along the town's main road, flanked by rows of aging, white-painted wooden houses and peeling storefront signs. The ocean opened up to her left, vast and blue. The wind blew in its signature salt, and for a fleeting moment, Riley was 17 again, riding on the back of Mason's bike, hair flying, giggling as they skipped school to watch the sunset at the lighthouse. She shook her head and smiled faintly. 3 years had passed. This town was still a time capsule, only the people inside it had changed. Riley pulled up in front of the clinic in the center of town, nestled between a bookstore and a breakfast diner. The sign, Dr. Howard and Associates, had faded with time, but it still brought back memories of playing nurse on the front porch with Mrs. Howard's daughter. Now, Mrs. Howard had retired, and Riley, the once smallest patient, was now the one taking over. She stepped inside, a wind chime on the door tinkling softly. The smell of antiseptic and old wood still lingered. An older nurse looked up from the reception desk, eyes wide.
My goodness, Riley Bennett. The little girl's a doctor now.
Still me Jess, with a few extra wrinkles.
Linda came around the desk to hug her. Her arms were still thin but warm as ever. Riley hugged back, though her heart stayed quiet as if her emotions were holding their breath, waiting for the right moment to exhale.
Upstairs office yours now. Everything's just like Dr. Howard left it. Oh, and Daisy still has that apple pie you love.
I remember.
Remember, the word came out like a scratch across her chest. She remembered Kyle, his mischievous grin, his bright eyes when he spoke of big dreams. But she remembered Mason, too, the quiet one, always furrowed. Who could make her laugh with just a glance? After a quick unpacking, Riley stepped back out, hands tucked into her coat pockets. She walked along the main street, past familiar shops and corners that hadn't changed, and then without even looking at a sign, her feet brought her to the front door of Daisy's Brew. She pushed it open, the bell chimed, and the scent filled her chest. Fresh coffee, buttery scones, and something that smelled like old summer. Near the window, Mason sat alone, holding a black coffee, eyes lost somewhere past the sea. She recognized him instantly, though his hair was shorter, beard thicker, and his shoulders heavier. But those eyes, that posture, it was still Mason. Still the boy who took her to the pier on lazy afternoons, who smuggled her out to the bay at noon behind their parents' backs. She almost turned to leave, but he'd already seen her. Their eyes met. 1 second, 2. Then Mason gave a small nod, not a smile, not a frown, just the kind of nod you give an old acquaintance, nothing more.
Hey.
Hey.
She walked closer, stopping a few feet from his table, unsure if she should sit. Light from the window traced the lines on her face, mature. Yes, but also tired from a long journey.
I got in this morning.
I know.
Word travels fast.
Small town.
An awkward pause. She nodded, forced a smile, opened her mouth to say something, but Mason stood up.
I have to get back to the station. Coffee's still good here.
I still remember how you take it black. No sugar.
He paused for a beat, then brushed past her, his shoulder grazing her coat. The door opened, the bell rang, and Mason was gone as if he'd never been there. Riley stood still, hand clutching the strap of her bag. Her heart felt heavy. She wasn't mad at him for being cold. She understood. Even she didn't know how to face the past. She had loved Kyle in the way a girl loves someone brave and kind. But her heart had never stopped whispering Mason's name. And maybe that was the real guilt she carried back to this town. She ordered a cappuccino and sat at her old spot by the window. Outside, the waves still brushed the shore gently, as if nothing had changed. But Riley knew some things, once lost, never return the same again. As Mason drove into the cemetery, the sky had already dimmed. The sun had just slipped beneath the horizon, leaving behind a faint orange streak, as if a chapter was quietly closing. Everything felt eerily still, just the crunch of tires on dirt and the rustle of falling leaves. The town had gone to sleep. And once again, he was alone. He hadn't wanted to come, but he couldn't stay away either. For 3 years, he hadn't once stepped foot here to visit Kyle's grave. Always an excuse, always a reason to avoid the guilt that swelled every time he thought of the brother he couldn't save. But tonight, something had pulled him here. Maybe it was Charlie's words this morning. Maybe it was Riley's eyes. Either way, Mason knew he couldn't keep living in avoidance. He parked just outside the cemetery gates and stepped out slowly. Each step felt heavy, dragging the past behind him. The old gravestones, the grey slabs of stone, they all seemed to watch him, silently asking, "Why couldn't you save your brother?" He made his way to Kyle's grave. The headstone was a simple block of black stone, Kyle's name etched boldly into it. Below, the words read, Kyle Whitaker. 1996, 2018. A hero in everyone's heart. The inscription tried to comfort, but to Mason it only deepened the pain. Hero, he had never wanted to hear that word used for Kyle. Mason placed his hand on the stone and closed his eyes. For the first time in 3 years, he allowed himself to feel it. The hollow ache of hearing his brother cry out for help and being unable to do anything, to lose someone he loved and do nothing.
You know, Kyle, I didn't do anything. I couldn't do a thing.
He bowed his head, his voice choking. For 3 years, Mason had lived like a shadow, caught in an endless loop. hiding the truth that inside. He was slowly fading. The town. The job, none of it had been enough to pull him from the darkness. Why Kyle? Why not him? Mason couldn't understand. Why the one with dreams still waiting to come true, the one who never got to say goodbye, never got to live a little more? He felt warmth trickling down his cheek. It wasn't rain, just tears that wouldn't stop. Mason took a deep breath, tried to hold it in. He couldn't. Only the wind answered, whispering through the trees as if mourning with him. Mason sat by the grave, hands resting on his knees, eyes locked on the etched letters. Time passed, but some wounds never heal, and Mason had no idea how to fix the break inside him. Both brothers once had dreams. Kyle had dreamed of becoming a great firefighter, not just a member of the team, but someone who saved lives, made a difference. Mason had dreamed of a quiet life beside his little brother. No trauma, no loss, but the fire had taken all of it. Mason rose to his feet and looked up at the night sky. The cold wind had picked up, sweeping yellow leaves toward his boots. The breeze carried the scent of the ocean, as if the sea and wind had paused to speak only to him.
I won't forget you, Kyle, I promise.
He turned to leave, but just then, he saw a figure approaching the grave Riley. She hadn't noticed him at first, but when Mason stepped back, giving her space, her eyes finally found him. She stood beside him, silent. Mason didn't speak, neither did she, but in Riley's gaze, there was understanding like words would have been too much.
I've missed him every day for the past 3 years.
Her voice pierced Mason's chest. He looked at her, unsure he had the strength to respond.
Are you okay?
I don't know, but I'm trying.
They stood there in silence. No need for more. It was a quiet moment of shared grief, one that only Kyle's memory could truly link them in. Night had fallen completely, but neither of them rushed to leave, because sometimes someone simply being there is the only thing that softens the pain. Mason walked along the coastal road, where the autumn wind rustled through the grass and the scent of sea salt still lingered in the air. He had no destination in mind, just letting his thoughts wander, trying to escape the weight of work, of Kyle, of everything that had been. Suddenly, a faint cry startled him. He looked toward the wooden pier and saw a young boy trying to climb the railing. The boy lost his balance and fell. A gust of wind swept by, but not all winds can save. Without thinking, Mason ran toward him, vaulted over the railing, and dove into the sea. The next few seconds were tense, but training kicked in. Mason pulled the boy safely to shore. The child coughed and cried, but he was alive. Mason had saved someone today. Still catching his breath, Mason turned and saw Riley in the distance, running toward them. Her eyes were filled with worry, but her face carried the calm focus of someone who knew what needed to be done. She said nothing, just knelt to check on the boy, then gently tapped Mason on the shoulder as if to say, "I know you're okay." They stood there in silence for a moment, as if the years between them had never happened. It felt strange, yet warm in a way neither could explain. They'd saved people together before, but this time something was different. Every breath, every glance held a new weight. Finally, Riley looked up at Mason. She didn't need many words, just a quiet smile, and a glance that said thank you without saying it.
Thank you.
Mason looked at her, his brow furrowing slightly, as if something had just occurred to him. In that brief moment, he realized no matter how much time had passed, no matter how they had changed, some things remained. The way he felt around Riley hadn't shifted. She still felt like home.
The kid's okay, right?
Yeah, you got to him in time. He'll be fine.
Nothing else but the waves hitting the shore. Riley stood, picked up the boy, and started walking him back toward the pier. Mason stayed behind, watching her go. Something about the moment felt different, like an invisible thread connected them, and he couldn't quite explain it. Mason turned to walk down the quiet road again, but he stopped when he heard her voice call out.
Mason.
He turned. Riley stood a short distance away, her gaze serious, yet gentle.
I know you're trying, but if you ever need help, you can always come to me.
Mason looked at her for a long time. Her words were soft, but they felt like a door opening, one he wasn't sure he was ready to walk through. He nodded, said nothing else.
Thanks.
Riley didn't move right away. She didn't push. She understood. Sometimes words weren't necessary. Sometimes presence was enough. And Mason kept walking, his steps lighter than before. Just a simple moment, but maybe one he wouldn't forget. Riley pulled up in front of the old boathouse, the place where she'd spent countless summer hours with Kyle and Mason. The doors were weathered and worn with time, but the memories she carried of laughter, sunlight, and the innocence of youth remained vivid, as if they'd happened only yesterday. She sat still for a moment, hands gripping the steering wheel, unwilling to step out. A part of her still wasn't ready to face this place, the container of a past, both beautiful and bruising. The boathouse sat near the shoreline, its wooden slats faded, the scent of damp timber lingering in the air. This was where the three of them used to play, under the golden light, where she and Kyle once built model ships they dreamed would someday sail the ocean. Now, those wooden dreams lay broken, half-formed and dust-covered. When Riley stepped out of the car, her feet felt heavy, as though each step tugged her deeper into memory. She didn't look at the boathouse right away. She stood still, took a long breath. Trying to brace herself, she hadn't expected that after all these years. The past could still feel so present. She opened the door, letting in a wash of muted daylight. The space inside was unfamiliar, and yet exactly as she remembered it, dusty, quiet, unmoved. The old model boats were still there, covered in time, as if waiting for someone to finally take them out to sea. She stepped forward and touched one. The cold of the wood seeped into her fingers, making her shiver. The memories came flooding in. She could see it clearly, Mason and Kyle laughing, building boats, telling wild stories, and she was there too, always close, always part of it. But what hurt the most weren't the memories themselves, but the feelings she had never spoken. She had loved Mason, loved him for as long as she could remember, but she never said it. Kyle had been the one brave enough to confess his feelings first, and Riley, not wanting to hurt anyone, had chosen silence, not. She sat down on an old chair in the corner, eyes resting on the dusty boats. Over the years, she had asked herself countless times, had she loved the right person? Had she made the right choice? But now, with Kyle gone, those questions no longer mattered. What remained was grief, and the ache of everything left unsaid. Sitting there in the quiet, Riley felt tears sting her eyes, but she didn't let them fall. She had learned to hold back a long time ago, to keep it in. But in this moment, surrounded by the past, she couldn't pretend. The unspoken words, the choices, the regrets, they rose like a tide inside her. And there was no way to stop them. In her memory, she saw herself and Mason on a summer afternoon, sitting together in this very place, looking out at the ocean, talking about dreams and futures. But those dreams had shattered. She'd never told Mason how she felt, convinced that Kyle was the one who deserved her heart. Kyle was open, warm, expressive. Mason was quiet, unreadable. And in choosing Kyle, she had unknowingly broken a part of herself too. Riley stood up, wiping a tear that had escaped. She looked again at the old boats, thinking about all that had been lost, what could have been, what never was. The years had passed, the memories had stayed, but she couldn't live in them forever. She couldn't keep punishing herself for things she couldn't undo. At last. Riley turned and stepped outside. She couldn't stay here any longer. The pain in her chest was too much. But as she crossed the threshold, she felt something shift. A small understanding she had to leave the past where it belonged behind her. She couldn't rewrite what had happened, but she could choose how to carry it. She could choose to keep going. Standing in the open air, Riley looked up at the grey sky. The cold wind swept through, bringing with it the sharp scent of salt. No matter how hard she tried, she knew she'd never forget Kyle or Mason, but at least now. She had faced what needed to be felt, and she knew she would keep living for herself. Music pulsed from the main stage, lanterns glowing like fireflies above the crowd, and the sweet, smoky scent of roasted corn floated on the breeze. Seaborough's annual summer fair was in full swing, a town tradition that drew neighbors and tourists alike into one glowing, carefree evening. But Riley didn't feel the joy. She'd been coaxed into joining the Old Flames game, a playful couples trivia contest she never intended to be part of. When the announcer called her name alongside Mason's, there was no way out. They had to step up, shoulder to shoulder, into the halo of light and the echo of cheers. Mason stood beside her, saying nothing, but his eyes flicked to hers quiet, unreadable, holding something back. Riley could feel the tension between them, despite the crowd's laughter and the game's light-hearted tone. With Mason there, beneath the paper lanterns, everything felt heavier, more real. The feelings she had buried long ago stirred to the surface. The game began with easy questions. Who stays up too late? Who forgets song lyrics the most? The crowd roared with laughter, but Riley barely heard them. Mason's gaze never wavered from her, as if searching for something unspoken. She met his eyes, unable to look away. It wasn't just a game. It was a confrontation of silence, of memory, of everything they hadn't dared say. Then came a question that sliced through the air like a knife.
Who's better at hiding how they really feel?
Riley froze. That wasn't a question, it was a confession, dressed up as a joke. She felt Mason's eyes on her again, steady, unmoving, waiting. The host chuckled at the silence.
Looks like you two are sitting on some pretty big secrets.
Riley swallowed, forcing a smile that barely held. Her heart pounded so loudly she was sure Mason could hear it. His presence beside her was magnetic, overwhelming.
I think we both know the answer. But maybe we're not ready to say it out loud.
The crowd laughed again, oblivious to the meaning behind her words, but Riley felt the truth in them, the aching, unsaid truth. No matter how far she'd run, no matter how much time had passed, her feelings for Mason had never left. A few more questions followed, but she barely remembered them when the game finally ended. The audience applauded and the lights dimmed slightly. But Riley and Mason remained still, caught in the weight of unspoken things. As the crowd began to disperse, they stayed where they were, frozen in a silence that begged to be broken. Finally, Riley couldn't take it anymore.
It was just a silly game. Mason.
Mason looked at her, and in his eyes was something she couldn't name: a struggle, a question, a wall he hadn't yet decided to take down. He nodded once, quietly, and turned away. Riley could feel the exhaustion in his steps, but what hit her harder was the sudden emptiness in her own chest. She stood alone, watching him disappear into the blur of the fair. And all she could feel was this hollow ache, the sense that, despite everything they'd been through, something between them had never been resolved. Something still hovered, still waited. She sighed and turned away. Around her, laughter echoed and music soared, but inside, Riley carried a quiet sadness one she couldn't shake, as if all the years, all the choices, had led her back to this, a love she never stopped feeling, and a silence she never learned how to break. Riley stepped into Kyle's old room, a place where he had spent countless hours writing letters and building model boats. Now, the room was thick with dust, filled with the silence of forgotten things. Kyle was gone, but his presence lingered in every unfinished sketch, every half-built boat, every worn notebook left behind. She walked toward the desk, the one where Kyle had sat for hours crafting letters to friends and family, or sometimes just writing down the thoughts he never dared to say aloud. Riley didn't know why she had come back here. Something had pulled her, something deep and restless. The desk, the relics of Kyle's life she still couldn't let go. No matter how much time had passed. She opened one of the old notebooks, flipping through brittle pages until a folded piece of paper slipped out and floated to the floor. Riley picked it up. It wasn't part of the notebook, it was a letter, and at the top, in Kyle's unmistakable handwriting, was the name Mason. Riley sat down slowly, unfolded the letter, and began to read Kyle's familiar script. Each word struck her with a force she wasn't prepared for. Honest, raw, full of quiet ache. Mason, I don't know where to begin, but there's something I need to say. I know Riley loves you, I've known for a long time, but don't worry, I'm not angry, I just want you to understand. If it can't be me, then let it be you. Love her the way she deserves. Love her for both of us. Don't let silence steal your chance at happiness. Kyle. A wave of emotion slammed into Riley's chest. She had always known her feelings for Mason weren't hers alone, but seeing Kyle's words, seeing how clearly he had known was something else entirely. He had understood everything, and more than that, he had given them his blessing, a kindness Riley had never dared to imagine. Tears began to fall, slow and unstoppable, not just for Kyle's absence, but for the guilt she had buried so long. She had never confessed her feelings to Mason. She had chosen Kyle, not out of deceit, but out of fear of hurting someone, of breaking something. But deep down, her heart had always belonged to Mason, and now, Kyle was only a memory. She stared at the final lines of his letter, her hands trembling. Why had she kept this letter? Why hadn't she read it before? She didn't know, but now that the truth was before her, she had no idea what to do with it. Could she love Mason the way Kyle had wanted, or would that love forever remain buried in yesterday? Riley stood, folding the letter with shaking fingers and slipping it into her coat pocket. She couldn't stay in this room any longer. She had spent too many years trying to outrun these feelings, trying to live inside the silence. But this letter, it had changed something. She knew the past wouldn't let go easily, but neither would love. As she stepped into the hallway, Riley took a deep breath. She didn't know how she would face Mason after this. But one thing was certain, she couldn't keep hiding. Whatever came next, she had to meet it head-on. Outside Kyle's door, the air was cool, still. Riley stood for a moment, letting everything sink in. She didn't have all the answers, but she had one now, Kyle's voice, gently urging her forward. She walked away with a storm in her chest, and a kind of courage she hadn't felt in years. Mason couldn't sleep. The images from the old couple games still lingered, especially Riley's eyes when she looked at him. A heavy silence had settled between them, thicker than any words. the emotions he had buried. The memories he had avoided, all of them surged back with force. He couldn't keep living in the shadows of yesterday. He had to face it, no matter how hard. He didn't know how far he had walked before he found himself at Riley's door. All he knew was that the moment he stood there, emotion flooded him. Frustration, anxiety, disappointment. He couldn't let Riley keep burying the truth anymore. When Riley opened the door and saw Mason, she wasn't surprised, but her heart jumped. She hesitated. Part of her didn't want to let him in, but something in his eyes stopped her. There was no calm this time, only confusion and restrained anger she had never seen in him before.
Riley, we need to talk.
Riley stepped aside, letting him in without a word. She didn't know what to say. The air between them felt too heavy to breathe. A part of her wanted to keep quiet, but she knew she couldn't hide forever. Mason stood in the living room, eyes scanning the space but avoiding her. He couldn't keep still. The silence stretched too long, and then he snapped.
I can't do this anymore. Riley, I can't keep pretending the past doesn't exist. You have Kyle's letter, don't you? The one he wrote to me. He knew how you felt about me. Why couldn't you say it yourself? Why couldn't you tell me what Kyle already understood? I needed to hear it from you, not through silence.
Riley stood frozen, unable to respond. She could hear the pain in his voice, the frustration, and she felt paralyzed. How could she explain what she herself hadn't figured out? How could she explain that Kyle had always known, even when she didn't have the courage to speak? But Riley had reached her breaking point too. She stepped forward, her voice low but laced with pain.
Don't you see? Mason, I couldn't love you while carrying this grief. I couldn't live trapped between you and Kyle. We've lost too much already. I didn't speak because I didn't want to hurt anyone. But that doesn't mean I didn't feel it.
Mason looked at her, eyes searching for something understanding, maybe, but finding only a void.
But Riley, I've been standing on the outside for too long. Kyle knew everything. I didn't. He understood. I don't. And now it feels like it's too late. We've missed everything.
His words hit her like a slap. Riley had hidden her heart for so long. But now everything was unraveling. She couldn't speak. She just stood there, tears welling in her eyes, every part of her breaking open. She raised a trembling hand to wipe her face, but the tears wouldn't stop.
I didn't know what to do. Mason. I couldn't love you with everything falling apart. I loved Kyle. And now I don't know what's left of me. I just wanted the hurting to stop. For all of us.
Mason fell silent. The room, the moment, the truth, too much. Nothing had ever been simple between them. And now, it was clear it wasn't just the two of them caught in this knot. It had always been the three of them, tangled in something too complicated to name. There was nothing more to say, not tonight. Mason turned and walked out. Rain had started to fall, mixing with Riley's tears as she stood motionless in the hallway, watching him go, feeling hollow. He didn't look back. The rain blurred his figure into the night, dissolving him into shadows. But Riley couldn't let go of the words they'd exchanged. She stood there, alone in the dark. Surrounded by emotions she couldn't even begin to untangle. Mason stood on the hilltop, staring down at the neighborhood below. The morning wind was sharp, but it did nothing to cool the tension building in his chest. For weeks, the dry heat had raised the threat of a major fire, and today, it finally happened. The flames had broken out on the northern ridge and now threatened a large section of Seaborough. Fire trucks roared past him, sirens wailing, but today the urgency felt different. There was something heavier in the air, something Mason couldn't shake. As he looked at the thick black smoke twisting up into the sky, he knew this wasn't just another fire. This was a reckoning with memories that never stopped burning. He zipped up his firefighter uniform, snapped his helmet into place, and moved quickly toward the engine. His crew was already mobilizing. Mason was the first to volunteer as always. It was instinct. But this time, standing in front of those raging flames, a familiar fear crept up his spine, the kind that never truly left. He couldn't stop thinking about what had happened 3 years ago. The image of Kyle, his younger brother, trapped in a fire they couldn't reach in time, played over and over in his mind, and now, if he failed to save someone again, he didn't know how he'd live with it. The fire grew fiercer by the minute. As they approached the burning zone, a strange glint caught Mason's eye. A house near the edge of the neighborhood was engulfed in flames. It was the first to be hit in the blaze, and when Mason saw it clearly, his heart clenched. It was the same house where Kyle had died. Mason froze, eyes wide, the world tilted. He couldn't believe it. How could it be that house? The one etched into his nightmares, the very place where everything had gone wrong. A surreal wave of disbelief surged through him, stronger than the heat around him. Shouts echoed from the distance, but Mason couldn't move, his body locked up. Kyle's face, the screams, the choking smoke, it all came rushing back like a tidal wave. He wanted to turn back. Every fiber in him wanted to run, but his team didn't let him. "Let's go," a teammate yelled. Snapping Mason out of his daze, they charged forward. Into the heart of the fire, Mason followed, heart pounding, grief roaring in his chest. There was no turning back. Mason stepped into the burning house alongside his fire crew, but the moment felt like a nightmare repeating itself. He'd responded to countless calls, fought hundreds of fires, but this time was different. This house, the way the flames roared through it, wasn't just another blaze, it was something deeper, a scar that had never healed. Thick smoke choked the air, stinging his eyes. Each step felt heavier, slower, like he was moving through the weight of memory. The acrid scent of charred wood filled his lungs. And with it came the memory of Kyle, his younger brother, trapped, unreachable, lost in a fire they couldn't beat. The helplessness of that day returned, wrapping around him like the smoke itself. Mason drew a deep breath and tried to shake it off. He was a firefighter. He had made a promise, never let fear stop him. Not then, not now. But the hotter the fire grew, the louder that fear whispered. He pushed through fallen beams and blackened furniture. Somewhere in the distance, he heard it, a faint cry, a voice, weak but real, calling out for help. Without hesitation, Mason moved toward it, step by step, sound by sound, until he saw her, a little girl, maybe 9 years old, eyes wide with terror, pinned beneath a collapsed beam. Her small hands trembled as she reached out. Desperate, he dropped to his knees and carefully removed the debris, one piece at a time, every motion deliberate, cautious. When he finally pulled her free, she didn't cry. She just stared up at him, silent, but in her eyes he saw something that nearly undid him: trust, hope. Carrying her through the smoke, Mason couldn't stop thinking of Kyle. In that moment, he felt his brother beside him, as if Kyle was saying, "This time, you made it." But he hadn't saved Kyle, he never could, and that failure still clung to him like soot. He handed the girl off to his crew, watching as they loaded her into the ambulance. But his heart remained in that burning house. The flames inside were old flames, grief that never cooled. Kyle was still there, in his memory, unrescued, unmoving, outside. Mason turned toward the blaze. The world blurred at the edges. That fire wasn't just consuming a building, it was devouring everything he hadn't said, every regret he never voiced. His chest tightened, but he knew he couldn't go back. Eventually, he turned away. His eyes closed against the wind and ash, but the memories still burned beneath his ribs. Riley. She was the only one who might understand, the only one who could help him untangle the grief knotted deep inside. Mason couldn't keep running from his past. Not anymore. This time he had to face it no matter how much it hurt. Mason returned from the fire exhausted, his body aching and spent. The blaze had been extinguished, but inside him the flames still raged. The memory of Kyle, his death in that fire 3 years ago, haunted Mason every minute. He hadn't saved him, and that helplessness clung to him, denying him peace. He had pulled a little girl from the fire, but the pain of losing Kyle was still too much. He needed to let it out. He needed to free himself from the weight of guilt, but he didn't know how. His wounds weren't just physical, they were carved deep in his soul. So he went to Riley. Riley was home, winding down after a long, quiet day. She wasn't expecting Mason, but in his absence, something had felt missing. They weren't as close as they once were, but she still thought of him worried in ways she hadn't said aloud. All she could do now was wait and hope. When Mason knocked on the door, no words were exchanged at first, just silence. Riley opened it, her eyes filled with quiet concern. She wasn't surprised. She had known that after a fire like this, he'd need someone who knew him. Mason stood there, his eyes dark with pain and exhaustion. He had faced countless fires, but this one had broken something inside him. Words caught in his throat. There was only one thing he wanted now: to stay with her, even if just for a moment of peace. Riley didn't ask him about the fire. She didn't need to. She understood he needed space to breathe, a place where the ghosts couldn't follow him. She didn't need the details, she just needed to be there. She invited Mason inside. He stepped in quietly and sat on the couch without a word. The silence between them was heavy, but somehow enough. Riley moved closer, meeting his weary gaze. She saw the tension, the grief, but she knew no words could reach him yet. Only time could do that. She retrieved the first aid kit and began tending to the burns and scrapes on his hands. Her touch was gentle, steady, like she'd done this before. But tonight, it felt different. She wasn't just caring for a friend. She was tending to someone carrying a pain too heavy to speak. Mason sat still, absorbing every quiet motion. He said nothing, but inside, the weight of everything unsaid crushed him. When she finished, Riley looked at him, sensing the storm still raging beneath the silence. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. She just sat beside him. The moment stretched, deep and quiet. Neither of them wanted to break it. Everyone has wounds too deep for words. At last, Mason lifted his head, eyes brimming with tears. He couldn't hold it back any longer. Riley watched, saying nothing, no judgment, no demands, just understanding.
I can't live with this pain anymore. Kyle, he's still here, inside me, and I don't know how to let him go.
Riley didn't answer immediately. She simply reached for his hand, holding it gently. She didn't need to speak. She understood. Pain like his takes time. It doesn't need fixing, it needs company. Mason exhaled, and in that breath, something eased. Not everything, but enough. Not because of words, but because she was there. He wasn't alone anymore. Riley was the quiet shelter he hadn't known he needed. They sat like that, silent, unmoving, and slowly, something shifted. No promises, no confessions, just truth. They were no longer strangers to each other's pain. Mason sat in silence, eyes fixed on the window, watching the night sky. The rain had stopped, but the air still felt heavy, thick with unspoken emotions. The storm inside him hadn't passed, but Riley's quiet presence in the room was like a salve, not a cure, but a comfort. Riley stood in the kitchen, watching him without saying a word. She had seen everything, not from what Mason said, but from what he couldn't. She understood he needed time, and she was willing to wait, not with cold silence, but with acceptance, with understanding. Mason turned to look at her, his gaze still a little distant, but no longer filled with torment. There was something else in his eyes now. Peace. The ghosts of Kyle still lingered, but tonight they felt just a little farther away, because Riley was here.
I don't know what to do, Riley. All these years, I've tried, but I still can't escape the guilt.
Riley didn't answer right away. She walked over and sat beside him. Once again, no words, just presence. She gently placed her hand over his, as if to say, "I'm here, and I understand." Mason didn't pull away. He felt the warmth of her hand, soft, steady. It wasn't dramatic, but something inside him loosened. No more tears. But the weight in his chest began to lift, just enough to breathe again. Riley stayed with him, no pressure, no urgency. She knew he wouldn't spill everything tonight, but she also knew someday he would, and she'd be ready to listen. After a long moment, Mason finally looked into her eyes. He didn't speak, just smiled. A small, imperfect smile, but real, honest. And in that quiet expression, she saw a man who no longer had to carry everything alone.
Thank you.
Riley didn't reply. She leaned in and embraced him. It wasn't pity, it wasn't rescue, it was the embrace of someone who knew no matter what the past held, they could still walk forward together. No more hiding, no more pretending, just a quiet, full-hearted embrace. Mason held her back, and for the first time in years, he didn't feel lost. The past was still there, but now, he didn't have to face it alone. They stood there, saying nothing more, but in that silence, they both understood this was a beginning, a quiet one, but enough. A few days ago, as autumn cast its golden warmth over everything, Mason had invited Riley on a fishing trip organized by the fire department. After months of tension and exhaustion, he realized they both needed a break, a chance to share a quiet moment away from it all. Riley didn't turn him down. She knew this trip wasn't just about catching fish, it was about putting life on pause, a brief moment to breathe again. So even though fishing wasn't her thing, she said yes. Because deep down, she understood this was about peace. That morning, Mason stood at the harbor, gazing out at the open sea. The ocean breeze swept across his face, cool and steady, carrying away the weight he'd been holding for too long. Not far from him stood Riley, holding a fishing rod, her eyes fixed on the vast horizon as if she, too, was searching for stillness in the waves. Mason walked toward her, unhurried, letting the silence stretch comfortably between them. When he stood beside her, she turned and offered a soft smile, the kind that said everything without needing words.
Just cast your line and enjoy the air. Don't worry if we catch anything.
Riley smiled back, her eyes gentle. She knew he hadn't invited her just to fish. He had invited her to share something quieter, something that didn't need fixing.
I know. Thanks for inviting me.
Mason smiled, and that was enough. This trip wasn't about the fish, it was about them finding space. Just the two of them, no deadlines, no ghosts. They boarded the boat together. Mason helped adjust Riley's rod, showing her how to hold it, how to cast. Everything unfolded slowly, naturally. The water lapped softly against the hull, the boat rocking gently, as if time itself had decided to slow down just for them. Mason didn't rush. He didn't fill the silence with chatter. He just let it be. And for the first time in months, he felt the tension in his chest loosen. Because this being here, beside Riley, this felt right. Beside Riley wasn't good at fishing, but that didn't matter. She let herself drift with the moment, with the ocean. She didn't need conversation. Between them, there was already a quiet understanding, a connection that didn't need sound. Mason glanced at her, saw the calm in her posture, the way she watched the water with quiet focus. He knew this wouldn't fix everything, but maybe, just maybe, it was enough to remind them that peace was still possible, even if only for a while. After the fishing trip, Mason felt a little lighter. The nightmares weren't as constant. The weight of the past no longer trailing behind him like a shadow. But deep down, he knew there was still one thing left, something he could no longer avoid: facing his family. After months of silence, Mason decided to come home for dinner, just a simple meal, but in his heart, it felt like walking into a storm. He had never hesitated to come home before. Yet now, each step toward the familiar porch felt foreign. The walls, the meals, the laughter, they all seemed coated in silence, thick with everything left unsaid. He drove through the quiet town, headlights casting a pale glow across the windshield. Every turn brought him closer to the house he once shared with Kyle. But now, it felt hollow, emptier than he remembered, and no matter how many times he came back, nothing could fill the space that Kyle left behind. When Mason arrived, the front door was already open, as if his mother had been waiting. She pulled him into a tight hug, saying nothing, just holding on. His father stood nearby, eyes tired but calm. They didn't ask why he'd stayed away so long. They didn't need to. The air between them was filled with quiet understanding and patient ache. They sat at the dinner table, sharing a modest meal. Mason tried to eat, but every bite felt heavy. His mother asked about work, about the fire department. Mason answered with short, clipped sentences. He didn't know how to speak about Kyle. He didn't know how to explain the guilt that still gripped him, how it wrapped around his throat like smoke. After a long silence, his father finally spoke, his voice low, steady, and gentle like a stone dropped into still water.
Mason, have you forgiven yourself?
Mason looked up, startled. The question struck him like a wave, unexpected, yet somehow exactly what he needed to hear. He had never asked himself that, never even allowed the thought. He hadn't forgiven himself for Kyle's death, and he didn't know how. His father held his gaze for a moment longer. He didn't press, but his eyes said what words couldn't. As a father, he understood what grief could do, and he knew Mason, the son he still had, was drifting further away, wrapped in guilt no one could reach. Mason dropped his gaze. Quiet, he didn't have an answer. But then, across the table, he caught his mother's eyes, gentle, worried, unwavering, and something began to stir inside him, something soft, long buried, the sense that maybe, just maybe, forgiveness wasn't for Kyle's sake, it was for his own. The dinner ended in silence, but not a sharp one. It was quieter now, yes, but with a different weight. As Mason stood to leave, nodding goodbye to his parents, the air felt lighter. He couldn't rewrite the past, but maybe, someday, he could learn to live beside it. Driving home. The night stretched calm around him. He thought of Riley, of the ocean, the fishing rod in her hand, the silent comfort she offered. He didn't know where things might go between them, but he felt it now, that opening, that tiny, stubborn thread of hope. He didn't speak, just drove. But something within him had shifted. Maybe he'd never completely forgive himself, but tonight he'd taken a step. And for now, that was enough. Night had fallen, and Mason lay awake in his own home. It had been a long time since he'd felt this way. No nightmares, no burning images of Kyle in the fire, no cold sweats or panic jolting him awake. Everything around him was still, quiet. And for the first time in 3 years, he could breathe. He glanced over at the photo on his nightstand, a picture of Kyle, old and slightly faded, but always within reach. Kyle's summer smile stared back at him, fishing rod in hand, eyes bright with hope. It was a beautiful memory, and a wound he had carried far too long. He still couldn't forget the way Kyle died, how helpless he'd been to stop it, how he'd carried that guilt like a second skin. But tonight felt different. Something inside him had shifted, softened. He had spoken to his parents, sat at the same table where so many unspoken things had lingered for years, and when his father's question echoed again in his mind, "Have you forgiven yourself?" Mason finally understood. That was the first step back to himself. He turned over in bed, the peace inside him growing. No more dreams clawing at the edges of sleep. No more nights spent staring into darkness, afraid of what he'd see. He lay still, letting the silence wrap around him. A part of Kyle would always live in his memory. But tonight, for once, it wasn't haunting, it was warm. It was okay. There was no need to run anymore. The guilt was still there, yes, but it no longer crushed him. He had shared it with his family, he had shared it with Riley, and now, for the first time, he felt like he could begin again, not just survive, but truly live without the shadow of the past holding him back. Mason looked toward the window, where the soft night light spilled across the floor. Something had changed. He didn't need to cling to the pain anymore. Tonight, he had faced it, really faced it, and every small step forward now felt like a victory in its own quiet way. He thought of Riley, her quiet presence, the way she understood him without needing many words. Riley had helped him see that he didn't have to live inside the past. She was the first person who reminded him what peace could feel like. Mason smiled softly at the thought of her. He knew he couldn't rewrite history, but he could change how he walked through it. And in this moment, he finally felt ready for whatever came next. It wouldn't be perfect, nothing ever was, but it would be a future he no longer had to face alone. He closed his eyes, and sleep came gently. No jolt, no panic, no fire, just rest. And in the morning, when sunlight poured through the window, Mason woke to something unfamiliar, something quietly miraculous, a sense of being reborn, of truly beginning again. No fear, no ghosts, just the day and a heart finally at peace. Mason stepped into the familiar cafe, the place where he and Riley had spent so many afternoons in their younger days. The small space still smelled like roasted beans and warm wood. As he passed through the door, a wave of memory swept over him, no matter how many years had passed. This place hadn't changed. It still held the echoes of the moments they once shared. Riley had arrived earlier. She sat in their usual corner, hands wrapped around a hot cup of coffee. She hadn't seen Mason yet. Her eyes were fixed on the table, deep in thought. Mason watched her from a distance for a moment, sensing the tension in the air. He knew today wouldn't be an ordinary conversation. This was a turning point. When Riley finally looked up, Their eyes met, and in that instant, there was no need for pretense. Mason walked over and gently sat across from her.
Have you been waiting long?
Not really. I just got here too.
Riley stirred her coffee, then glanced at him again, as if searching for something in his eyes. She didn't speak, letting the silence stretch between them, but in her heart, something was stirring a quiet unease, a decision she knew she couldn't delay much longer. Mason felt the silence settle, but he didn't rush her. He waited, calmly, sensing that today, Riley would finally say what had been weighing on her heart. Riley took a deep breath and set down her cup. It was time.
Mason, there's something important I need to tell you.
Mason didn't interrupt. He simply nodded, giving her the space to speak. He could feel the heaviness of her words before they even left her lips.
I've been offered a job in Boston. A really big opportunity for my career. But I don't know what to do. If I go, I'd be leaving everything behind, including you.
Mason held her gaze. There was no surprise in his eyes. He'd known, deep down, that this moment was coming. A job like that, she couldn't just ignore it. But he also saw the hesitation in her, the turmoil that had nothing to do with work and everything to do with them. Riley continued, her voice quieter now but full of emotion.
I don't know if I can leave this place. Leave the people I care about. I don't know if I can leave you. I don't know what to do.
Mason remained still, reading every flicker of doubt in her face. This was more than a career move, it was a crossroad in their relationship. After a moment, he spoke, slowly but firmly.
Riley, don't worry about me. You have to do what's best for you for your life. If you go, I won't stop you. But if you decide to stay, you won't be doing it alone. I'll be right here, whatever you choose.
Riley stared at him, a wave of relief washing over her. She hadn't expected those words, not so calmly, not so selflessly. The guilt, the fear of hurting him. It all faded. Mason wasn't just her friend, he was the one who saw her completely. She felt warmth spreading in her chest, a deep, quiet reassurance. She no longer wanted to run.
I want to stay. Not because of the job, or because I'm afraid. I want to stay with you, and I want to figure out how we move forward together.
Mason smiled, not just a soft smile this time, but one full of warmth and meaning. He didn't need to say anything else. That look between them said everything. Riley lowered her head, tears glimmering in her eyes. But they weren't from pain, they were tears of release. She felt the weight lift from her shoulders. Mason reached out and gently took her hand. That one gesture, silent but sincere, was enough. Enough to say they were no longer standing at the edge of something uncertain, but stepping into it, side by side. Thank you for listening to the story. If you have any thoughts, feel free to share them in the comments below. I'd love to hear from you. Once again, I'm really happy to have you here. Don't forget to subscribe so we can keep sharing more stories about life together. Take care and see you next time.